The most infamous royal family to have ever ruled over England was the Tudors, and the Tudor Kings are associated with torture, execution, many marriages and scandal. It was Henry VIII who had 6 wives, and 2 of these were executed inside the walls of the Tower of London. But he was the second Tudor king to reign over England. His father, Henry VII, came onto the throne following defeating King Richard III in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth Field. He, with this, brought the Wars of the Roses to an end, and he united the nation by marrying Elizabeth of York, bringing together the houses of York and Lancaster. But he wanted to establish his family on the throne for centuries and to bring stability back to the monarchy. Henry VII reigned for around 24 years, but he died at the age of 52, leaving his kingdom in the hands of Henry VIII. But what is the story of the dreadful death of Henry VII? Now, Henry VII became the King of England by the right of conquest, and he then married Elizabeth of York to unite the warring factions of the Wars of the Roses and to bring an end to decades of disputes over the rightful king. Some saw Henry as a usurper who had dethroned the rightful King Richard, but he faced a number of rebellions in the years after that came in the form of the Pretenders, with these claiming that they were the princes in the Tower, or Edward V, the boy king, who had disappeared from sight inside the Tower of London. He managed to put them down and did show clemency at times, but when Perkin Warbeck's rebellion emerged in 1490, the king executed Warbeck, showing a more ruthless side. It showed that the king was someone who should not be messed with, but he was a rather inexperienced king to begin with. Henry VII was not someone who knew how to run a nation, and he had a number of close advisors who helped him to do this. He was more prudent than other monarchs, and he made the crown very rich through raising taxes and increasing the ruthlessness in which these were collected. But some people were not happy to pay this. He sought to keep peace with England and to make a profit, and he also signed a treaty with France that said the French would not support any more pretenders to the English throne. But Henry did invade Brittany in the November of 1492, and he wanted to keep this for the English, as the French had allied with the Spanish, whom Henry deemed as dangerous. He even built up a navy for this and formed alliances with the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope. But Henry VII was a man who was very shrewd, and throughout his reign one of the major boom industries was wool and cloth inside of England, and this was then traded around the world. He also increased his stranglehold over law and order, introducing justice of the peace to make sure that the nation's law were being adhered to. The Court of the Star Chamber was also used to make sure the king could deal with disputes and problems easily, and he dealt with threats to his own power in this. But Henry VII, despite having differing popularity, did manage to increase stability in the monarchy following the Civil War. But in 1502, Elizabeth of York and Henry VII's first son, Arthur, died. He was the heir to the throne and was very much the man expected to become the next Tudor king. He had died following his marriage to Catherine of Aragon inside of Ludlow Castle, and he passed away from the sweating sickness. This loss hurt the king greatly, and for a man who rarely showed any emotion in public, he was overwhelmed by grief. Henry VII would cry uncontrollably at court. However, further heartbreak came a year later, as his wife Elizabeth of York died inside the Tower of London. She had just given birth, but days later both Elizabeth and the child died, and with this Henry VII was devastated, and he shut himself away, and it was said he himself became very ill and almost died from this unknown illness. It was said that the only woman who could bring him out of his upset was his mother, but following Elizabeth's death, he did consider remarrying. In February of 1508, it was noted that the king was suffering from gout, and it was also reported months later that he was in the last stages of consumption. Writers of the time noted how, in the final years of his life, that Henry VII had become sicker more often, and that things were getting more serious each time. It was also reported around this time that Henry was very ill and in extremis, and that he was very ill without hope of recovery. But the king managed to battle on as long as he could, and by the end of March 1509 he knew that death was on the horizon, and he drafted his last will and testament. The decline in the king's health was brought about by the fact he was grieving his wife and son, and many of his close friends and loyal advisers also around this time became sick and ill. With this, Henry VII made sure that there would be a seamless transition of power for his son, Henry VIII, to come onto the throne after his death. Accounts of the death of Henry VII mostly come from Bishop John Fisher. He stated that he said how 2 nights before the king's death he became so weak that he could not hear mass at the altar and had struggled for some time to eat and drink. However, he was keen to do his religious duty, and he summoned his confessor to his bedside to hear the sacrament. Mass at his bedside was heard, and Henry, it was said to have been a very moving spectacle. It was said that those who witnessed Henry receiving the sacrament were moved with a marvellous compassion and flow of tears, that at some time they wept and sobbed by the space of 3/4 of an hour. An image of the proceedings shortly before the king's death shows him attended on by a number of his closest courtiers, most intimate members of his household. Shortly after hearing the religious blessing, Henry managed to cling on to life for another 48 hours. On the day of his death, he heard Mass again, and this time he held the crucifix a number of times with great reverence, embracing it tenderly and kissing it. He was in a significant amount of pain and was suffering and scared, and he in his final moments appealed to Jesus to deliver his soul and to protect him. It was said he claimed, "O my blessed Jesus, O my Lord, deliver my soul from the misery of this world, deliver my soul from these deadly pains, deliver my soul from this corruptible body." In his final moments, the king's son, Prince Henry, who was just 17 at the time, was summoned to his father's bedside for his final instructions, and the king said, "Fatherly and godly exhortations committed unto him the laborious governance of this realm of England." The king, Henry VII, died surrounded by his close friends and advisers, with William Fitzwilliam, the gentleman usher of Henry's office, being the one who closed the king's eyes after he died. Inside of his bedchamber at Richmond Palace, on the 21st of April 1509, Henry VII died from what was believed to have been tuberculosis, and he was 52 years old. He was buried inside of the chapel that he commissioned to be built inside of Westminster Abbey, in a tomb alongside his wife, Elizabeth of York. In the final days of Henry VII's life, the king knew that death was on the horizon. He knew what was coming his way, and he decided to spend his final days in prayer, apologising for the sins he had committed. He passed inside of Richmond Palace and was not alone, being surrounded by his friends and advisers. But the king had done well to bring some stability to the throne, but it was his son who would continue his work, but would bring a lot of more chaos and brutality to the throne. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.